Hey, it's a beautiful day. It's a beautiful Wednesday afternoon. This is Jon Adams with Talk of the Town. Woo, got a lot to talk about this week. Let's start with, I don't know if I told you guys this, but yours truly, if you can see me on the monitor, I'm actually wearing a hat that says Big Daddy on it. First of all, I didn't make the hat myself. It was given to me by my nephew. In certain circles, I'm known as Big Daddy, Big Papa, a number of different monikers, if you will. And and so this week, we found out that Kayla and Christian are having a baby boy. So in December, I will officially be a grandpa, meaning that I have to come up with a name to be called. And if you're Facebook friends with me, you'll know that I just put it out there, and thanks for a number of you for participating. What should I be called? And Papa John was one, and Papa was another. It was quite entertaining, some of the names that you guys came up with. But you know what? It's a fun time, and it's a great time to be alive if you're Jon Adams. I mean, I was down in Minneapolis, and I got to play in a golf outing for the Minneapolis Washburn alumni football players. It's always nice to go home. I mean, I call Fargo my home, but Minneapolis is where I grew up, and despite what you see on the news, it's still a pretty great place to go back to. You know, there's nothing like going home, and I call it getting grounded again. Seeing my family, I want to say congratulations to my niece Mariella. She just graduated from Hamlin Law School, and so that's pretty exciting for her. I wish her well, and good luck studying for the bar. This month, as you guys know or may not know, is Juneteenth month. It's the celebration of Juneteenth, and I'm going to talk a little bit about what Juneteenth means. Next week, I'm going to have Fred Edwards Jr. Fred Edwards Jr., he's worked in the community. His company's called Umoja, and he does a lot of active work with the youth in our community. He works in the schools with African American youth, and I believe it's all minorities and immigrants. And so he has that program, but he is also a Bush Fellow. But most recently, and not recently, but he's been asked, and he has done this in the past, he is the organizer along with his team. He is the organizer of the Juneteenth celebrations. And, you know, it's a wonderful celebration of, first of all, our emancipation or our freedom from slavery. I'm going to touch on that a little bit. I'm also going to touch on perception versus reality, and how that creates a problem in today's society. So kicking it off, first I want to tell you guys my golf game is rounding into form. For those of you who were concerned about whether I'm going to be able to get it done, if I'm going to be able to play well this year, well, played yesterday. I played pretty well, but just so you know, I'm coming. All you guys at Maple River Golf Course, get ready because it's going to be quite the season. And by the way, hats off to Matt and the crew out there who are doing a fantastic job. So this week, you know, I don't really watch news. You know, I don't watch the local news. I certainly don't watch Fox, and I certainly don't watch CNN because to me, they're not necessarily newsworthy. I think it's a lot of slant this way or that. It's hard to find somebody that's just reporting the news. But this week I decided, you know what? I'm actually going to sit down and I'm going to watch a half hour of Fox and a half hour of CNN. And when I got done, I reaffirmed that I don't need to watch news, okay? Because two subjects, and right now they're talking about the big beautiful bill and the fact that it did pass in the House, and now it's going to the Senate. And what I found amazing is there were two different positions. I mean, totally two different opinions as to whether it was good legislation. You know, whether the big beautiful bill was actually something that we should celebrate? Is it legislation that helps move the United States forward or helps U.S. citizens? And I can tell you that on the right side, they were singing the praises pretty heavy. They downplayed some of the stuff that is concerning to me. But on its face, I was just amazed how people could get on the radio, and even and I looked it over. I didn't sit down and study it, but I just found it interesting that there were such different opposing points of view, which led me to think about, perception versus reality. And what I'm learning, especially over at Davies High, is that perception, it is almost more important than reality to a lot of people. Okay? And if you look all around us, we see examples of that. The perception is that crime is rampant in Fargo. I hear people talk about Fargo isn't what it used to be. Fargo is just fine as far as crime goes. I think we have a stellar law enforcement group. For the most part, I think that the city commission does a serviceable job. I certainly know that there are areas that we can improve, but kind of like the federal government, I'm withholding judgment for another couple months before I really do a deep dive into that. But look at the perception. You don't hear people talking positively about law enforcement, and it's like, where does the perception that, particularly in Fargo, that law enforcement isn't doing what they should do? And part of it comes, not part of it, most of it comes from social media. A lot of it comes from what you see day to day on the TV. And the perception is somehow we need more accountability. And as you guys know, I did my internship at the U of M Police Department for a whole summer. And so I feel like I have an inside track on law enforcement here. And I can tell you that I know a few law enforcement, and the way that they go about their business, the way that they interact with the public is stellar. Now, if you happen to be in a situation where you interact with them and you don't think it's stellar, there's more than meets the eye. But on its face, when you look at the optics, it leaves a little bit to be desired. And so my question is, how do we battle perception versus reality? And part of that is getting involved. Like I said, I have friends that are in law enforcement. I had a situation where I got called by a scammer from the sheriff. They weren't from the sheriff's department, but they certainly claimed that I had some bench warrant and all this different stuff. And of course, I called a couple of my friends in law enforcement. They're like, yeah, it's a scam. It's been going around. But in that moment, I was like, man, what is going on here? How can we be so inept that I'm being asked about my whereabouts in regard to this and that? And it's like, holy smokes. But the only way that we can overcome perception is by having real dialogue. Okay? And it's funny because a lot of my real dialogue takes place with my son Jackson, who's a Trump supporter, and my other Trump friends. And we sit down and we have dialogue about what's good and what's bad. And it's funny because for me, I've always espoused the view of we need to be more of an isolationist country. And isolation doesn't necessarily mean that we're cutting ourselves off from the rest of the world, but we really need to be an America first country. Our government needs to be America first. And so, listening to my Trump friends, they say, well, that's exactly what Trump's doing. He's putting America first. Now, that's their perception, and my perception differs vastly. It differs vastly because on a daily basis, I see things that don't necessarily indicate that. Now, I would say that Trump is more of a business first, and then America will stick in where we can, but in no way do I believe that he is America first. And you only have to look at this big jet that he accepted as a gift. I mean, think about the things that Joe Biden and Obama came under fire for, and Hillary Clinton for accepting gifts. Okay, they weren't near as large as this new Air Force One, nor are they going to have the impact both in terms of security as well as financial. But the perception is, hey, there's nothing wrong with that. Well, yeah, there is something wrong with that because he's an elected official. Okay, and when we start giving the perception that it's okay for a elected official to take gifts, we're setting ourselves up for disaster. Now, we could talk about insider trader Nancy Pelosi all day long, but how is this any different? How is the perception that she's scamming the government, but yet it's okay to get a jet? Big Game James says we're up against the break. We're going to talk more about perception, but we're certainly going to pivot to Juneteenth because I think it's important that people understand what it means to us and what it means to be black in the United States and to be able to celebrate something like the freedom of slaves and how we've come to be in America. So when you come back, we're going to talk more about these issues. This is Jon Adams with Talk of the Town. If you want to call in, the phone number is 701-293-9000. Hey, welcome back to Talk of the Town with Jon Adams. That's the roots. James is doing his thing in the booth there. Thank you, James, for that. So we were talking about perception versus reality, and what I really wanted to get to was I was on the internet, and like I do is there's a couple of African publications that I get my information coming out of Africa. And a couple of weeks ago, I talked about what's happening with a number of African nations that have decided to end their ties to colonialism. At the forefront of that is a tiny little country called Burkina Faso, and their leader Ibrahim Traore. Traore is at the forefront of making this happen. And the idea behind it is these African nations want self-determination. Now, I mentioned this a year ago, the fact that there's a movement in Africa where Africa is starting to wake up, okay? And they're starting to want to have more self-determination and less colonial influence in their countries, which it makes sense. I mean, we decided we had enough of England and we moved to the United States. Unfortunately, we pushed the Indians and the Mexicans out. That's another story for another day. But the point is, these nations now, they're taking control of their natural resources. That's the single biggest thing that Africa has to offer the world. It is by far the most mineral-rich country, mineral-rich continent in the world, and a lot of these countries have been robbed of those minerals or those resources and people, okay, throughout the world. And even the United States, we see that the way that we're doing our foreign policy, that we're kind of hamstringing these guys and saying, hey, you will do this. And so it used to be the perception is that Africa is backwards and, you know, they don't have electricity and they don't have the means to build their own civilization, so to speak. Now, that's the perception. And even talking last year on the radio, I had people say, what are you talking about? There's so much infighting in these countries. There's so much corruption in these countries that they'll never be able to unite. Well, lo and behold, a year later, we have 7 African nations that are doing just that. But the interesting piece is more than establishing their own right to self-determination, they are also looking at black people globally, Africans globally. And so the leader of South Africa was talking about the need to support African or African Americans abroad. And it's the first time that I've ever heard that concept, Pan-Africanism supporting people of the diaspora. And the diaspora is simply the movement of our people from Africa to the United States and us becoming disenfranchised and losing our heritage. So the thought that these leaders are going with is that, particularly in the United States, that people in the United States, specifically African Americans, are suffering outrageous human atrocities on a daily basis. Okay? And there are going to be some people that say, I don't know if that's true. There are going to be people saying, well, yeah, it's not that bad. Well, it all depends on where you're sitting as to the level of uncomfortability that you feel when you hear about the human rights atrocities, and we see them every day. Okay? We see things happening to, particularly with ICE coming down and who they are actually targeting. A lot of people that look black and brown. I have yet to see an ICE raid where we're going into big business, where we know that there are a lot of people that are here illegally. We know that there are people that have overstayed their visas, but we're not seeing those people being deported or rounded up by ICE. So it looks like a very strategic thing that's happening here. And the Pan-African Council or Pan-Africanism is saying, hey, look, we have the resources that the world needs, and what we can do is economically, we can use our resources to see that countries that are committing these atrocities are actually held accountable. Now, I'm pretty excited about the whole thing. Okay. So for me, looking at the Pan Africanism and the thought that African nations are going to come together to help the plight of African Americans, to me, it's like, wow, our people are starting to come together, and it's something that if you're a part of it and you see it, and there's a certain hopelessness that you feel being black in America, this is a game changer. Because I can tell you that if, like the gentleman said, hey, you know what? If people are going to commit these atrocities, then we're not going to allow them access to our gold, to our lithium mines, to our rare earth metals that allow them to have the things that make their country go. Now, it's funny because in that vein, China and Russia are doing everything they can to have the seat at the table with these newly formed African countries or these governments that are now self-determining how they rule and how their resources go. So it just foreign policy-wise, the pressure that they could put on other nations to do better. I think, you know what? We've tried everything else, and it hasn't worked, but it's going to be a very interesting thing to follow, and of course I'm going to be following it, and I want to know what you guys think about it, because it really is something that is a game changer, along with the fact that these nations now are building their own wealth and their own infrastructure. The question I have is, they have a certain level of isolationism, which I talked about. How come we don't have that same sort of isolationist and that same sort of view from our elected officials? So just food for thought, something to think about. Big Game James says, I have a caller on the line. Vince, are you still there?
Yes, I am.
Hey, Vince, how are you today?
Good.
Good. You called in. You want to talk about Juneteenth?
Yeah, I have a couple things related to that.
Okay.
And I have no problem with there being a Juneteenth holiday, except that we can't afford to, or shouldn't be, paying federal workers or anybody else, businesses mandated to make that a paid holiday. And then I have something. Okay, and I just want to point out, and you probably know this, I've run into a number of people from South Africa. The tables have been turned there. I don't know how many people know that. And I have nothing against black or rate white higher than anybody else, any nationality. But they are doing the blacks are doing just exactly what they didn't like the whites doing when the whites were in a majority. Neither party is right. And as far as the other thing goes, the Trump plane.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't know what to think about that, but
sure you
supposedly
do.
they're going to search that plane, make sure there's no hidden devices in there, and I kind of think Trump is doing the right thing. I didn't realize our planes were so outdated. So, unless you have a question, I'll get off and
I'd like to
discuss it.
I wouldn't mind discussing a couple things because you threw a couple things out there. So the broad view of what's happening in South Africa is this: that somehow the white minority is being they're being beset upon, and that they are being treated less than. Okay, and
Yeah.
and so for me, there are a couple things, the thought process that I want to give you. So I listened to the leader of South Africa, and I forget his name, but he said the people that came here, the white people that settled here, they didn't ask for the land; they came in and took it. And the example he
Agreed.
used was, if somebody came and stole your car, okay, and you came and got it back, what obligation do you have to them to treat them well? Okay? So for years and years now, and we know what happened with apartheid, and we know how many millions of people were killed or displaced and imprisoned there, right? Now I'm a mind
Right.
like
I don't know the complete history on that, so I'm taking your word for it, and I believe you, knowing what happened in the United States.
well, and this is part of it. I mean, if we only have
Yeah.
part of the history, then we can't really make an informed statement one way or the other. Because if you just go look at Nelson Mandela, he's the prominent figure when we think about apartheid in South Africa. And so we know
Right.
what he went through being in prison for 30 years for fighting for his people, right? And then when he was
Right.
freed, he said, "Hey, listen, we are going to work with the whites here. We're going to allow them to maintain what they have here." Okay? The shift has come with this new regime. And the reason that the shift has come is because the economics that were supposed to happen, where there was supposed to be shared wealth by the small white majority, that never happened. Okay? So at the point that you have two people trying to work together and one person isn't working together, what's the second solution? So the second solution was, hey, look, we're going to allow you to work the land, right? And we will give you a share of the profit, but you're no longer going to be a major owner. All right. Now we already know that the reports that their mass genocide and all that was not true. Okay, and there
Who's
had
vast genocide?
what's that?
The vast genocide from the whites on
That
the
there were
blacks?
white farmers killed in mass.
Oh,
That's
I don't know about that. No, I'm
okay.
not saying that.
Well, since
Let me just point out one thing here,
okay.
or two things. I visited with different people just by accident.
Mm-hmm.
Where are you from? What are you doing?
Mm-hmm.
One was out in Boise, Idaho. Not that matters. He moved here from South Africa, and that's his side of the story.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Oh,
And it's probably biased.
let's put it this way. I don't think there was a peaceful transfer of power by any means. I,
Oh no, okay.
not at all. And I'm sure that there were people that were put out unceremoniously. Okay,
Right.
but to me, the
And the other
overall.
one is
Go ahead.
closer to home here. I talked to a guy out in North Dakota, some small town.
Mm-hmm.
He sold his hardware, and I said, his hardware store. And I said, who would buy that? I can't understand that because, the economy is down a little bit there, and there aren't a lot of people there. Well, he said every summer there are people that are white that come from South Africa
Mm-hmm.
and work for the farmers there.
Mm-hmm.
So, that's why I say it's kind of reversed itself, but nothing's going to be perfect. So, unless you have more questions, I don't want to take up any more of your time. But
No, I thank you for calling in, and this is a perfect example of having dialogue, right? And we
Right,
both become educated because up until this year, I wasn't aware that there were a bunch of South Africans in the farming industry, and in the past 2 weeks, I found out that we've got a collection, and so immediately I start to think, okay, there's a situation where J.D. Vance now. I believe that he is part of a group that buys up foreclosed farms, and evidently the 70 people that came over from South Africa are now going to be placed in these farms, right? So my question,
okay.
go ahead.
I wasn't aware of that. I'm just aware that they came, and every summer they come and work for like milking operations or different farming operations out in this North Dakota someplace. So
Oh,
I
I'm
didn't
sure
know
they
about
probably there's probably a work visa that allows them to come in. It's the same thing
yeah,
with
that's
some
right.
of the
And there's nothing wrong with it.
yeah,
There's
there's
nothing wrong
some of the
with it. I'm not-
Mexicans that come in on a work visa.
Yeah.
And absolutely, I don't have a problem with it. What I have is, my problem is, how did these farmers get to the place where they were foreclosed on? Why aren't we taking care of the farmers here so they can keep their farm, so that we're not giving them to people that were disenfranchised in another country? But Vince, I want to thank you for calling in. Big Game James says we're up against the break. When we come back, we're going to talk more about the diaspora and Pan-Africanism, as well as we're going to get to the Juneteenth celebration, which is coming up in a couple weeks. This is Jon Adams for Talk of the Town. If you want to call in, the phone number is 701-293-9000. Hey, welcome back to Talk of the Town with Jon Adams. I was just looking on the web here, looking up the subject that we were talking about, and it's very interesting to me that so many people are just they're really grabbing onto this South African genocide thing, which we have said, it turns out to be it's not genocide. I have no doubt that there are people that have been displaced and not treated well. I'm not an idiot. I don't presume that they just gave up their farms and went nicely, nor the people that were kicking them off the farms were just like, hey, it's time to go. I don't think it went down like that, but I find it amazing that how we as Americans can be so global in our thought process of taking care of people when in our country right now we have an epidemic of Native American women being trafficked, okay, that come up missing. Children are being trafficked and come up missing. We look at the disproportion of people that are imprisoned or accused of crimes. All of these things that we have here in the United States, but we hear very little pushback about how to fix those problems. And as a person of color, I'm vexed by it because when I see people have all these opinions about what's happening in the Ukraine and what's happening in Palestine and what's happening in South America, in my head I think, well, what about what's happening here at home? I mean, and it's almost like we bury our head in the sand regarding these issues, and it's like we can't do that. It's almost like people are afraid to be uncomfortable in saying the obvious. And that is, we do have stuff that we need to fix in this country. We can look at even in Minneapolis what's happening down there, with the FBI and the ATF and everybody coming down. Now, I don't know, but I do know this: I've seen enough in this country that I would really like to see people come out and say, hey, why don't we start cleaning our own house? Why don't we take to the streets when we see something that is obviously wrong? And we don't have to look any further than, like I said, this whole jet thing. For me, I have my own opinion on it, and I'm sorry, but if we have elected officials taking gifts of this magnitude, what exactly are the Saudis buying when they give a $400 million jet to one of the most powerful leaders in the free world? Not to mention the security risk. But what is that saying? It's almost, and it's not almost like, let's just call it for what it is. People are buying or currying political favor. We look at Doge. Elon Musk evidently is on his way out, but he's certainly taking a lot with him when he goes. Not just financially, but we don't know everything that guy had access to, and it doesn't look like he's going out on a good note. So my question is, what did he have access to? What in our country that he have access to? And it looks like he got carte blanche to look around and snoop and do this and that. And it's something that, am I the only one that's concerned about the way this went down? It sounds like he got a black eye from the Treasury Secretary because the Treasury Secretary was asking him some questions and it became uncomfortable and I don't know, maybe he got clocked. I wasn't there, but I can tell you, on its face, it's like, wait a minute, is this the way we want our government to operate? I certainly don't. And I'm going to talk about one other thing in regard to optics is, during the 4 years that Joe Biden was in office, we heard an awful lot about his ineptitude and his administration's ineptitude, right? And one thing that stood out and that I tell you, people grab it whenever we start talking, it's about the unemployment numbers and the fact that it was proven during his administration that those numbers were fudged. And I just laugh because you can put numbers out there, but there's always a way to check. So in terms of optics, we know what the perception was. Okay. But the reality is, now that the presidency is over and we can start looking at things, it wasn't as bad as it was made out to be. During the entire time that Joe Biden in office, I always felt like the sky was falling, and there were plenty of people to point out that the sky was falling. But here's the difference between that administration and this administration. With that administration, we were able to go in and look at the way things played out. Okay, we were able to look at those in unemployment numbers and say, hey, these look fudged, right? Now, here's the problem that I have with this administration. We don't have access to anything. We've been told, hey, I'm sure he's got a plan. He has this and that. No, the American people should have access. And because we don't have access, it worries me to death. I mean, we don't have accurate numbers of what DOGE actually has done. We don't have the actual numbers of what's been spent. But yet, there are numbers thrown out there. And so for me, on the optics to me, they don't look right. And they shouldn't look right to you. I don't care which side of the aisle you're on, but come on. This is our country. And these are the things that I talk about that, we shouldn't be sitting back and just saying, well, I'll wait for the numbers to come out. No. It's no different than legislation that's passed. We should have access long before. Why are we passing all these bills in the dark of night? My dad used to say, you only do things under the cover of darkness when you don't want other people to see. Big Game James says we're up against the final break. When we come back, we will actually have the conversation about the Juneteenth celebration. This is Jon Adams with Talk of the Town. If you want to call in, the phone number is 701-293-9000. Hey, welcome back to Talk of the Town with Jon Adams. We've been talking all things. We've been talking Pan-Africanism. We've been talking about perception versus reality. We went down the rabbit hole as far as what I think in terms of former administration and what we're doing now and the accountability piece. But I want to pivot because coming up, there's a 3-day event called Juneteenth. And for those of you guys don't know, Juneteenth is a celebration of the emancipation of black people out of slavery. And it's something that if you're black in the United States, it means a great deal, okay? And we say, in spite of, we persevere. In spite of all the things that we've been through, we persevere. And so Fred Edwards Jr., who's the owner and founder of Fred's Dissonance, he does a lot of work in the community. He's going to be on my show next week to talk about the Juneteenth celebration, but I did want to cover a couple things. First, there are going to be 3 different celebrations. There's going to be one in Moorhead, one in Jamestown, and one in Fargo. So we're going to have Juneteenth, it'll be in Jamestown, and June 19th will be in Moorhead. And I believe Saturday the 21st, it will be in Fargo. So there's going to be arts, there's going to be great food, there's going to be entertainment. Last year, I believe there were over 30,000 people that attended Juneteenth celebrations in the Fargo-Moorhead area in Jamestown. And so, we would encourage you guys to come out. In Fargo, well, not Fargo, but we have Barnesville Potato Days, which I absolutely love, although my waistline would say I shouldn't love it quite so much. But, these are the things that keep our community strong. These are the things that make us who we are as people in the city of Fargo, as citizens. And so that support, when I see people who don't look like me come out to events that we have, it reaffirms that I live in one of the greatest places on the face of the earth. I still think that Fargo, in terms of who we are as a group, as a people, I put people second to none here. And I always say it, it's not like we don't have our issues. I'm not going to sit up here and say that I'm totally fine with the way our city government works, or that there aren't some law enforcement challenges that I see. But you know what I also see? I see people working on the issues, okay? And it's not perfect. Like I said, I couldn't be a city commissioner. There's too much heat and there's too much stuff to do. And I don't care what you do, just like the schools. You're never going to be all things to all people. And my hat's off to the people who decide to sit in the fire and get those things done. But in the case of Juneteenth, it's all about celebration. Come out, great food. You get to learn about different cultures and stuff like that. It's no different than the multicultural celebration that they have at the Yom Konst every year. It's something that keeps us connected to the community. It keeps the community connected to people that look like me. So if you guys aren't doing anything one of those 3 days, come down and celebrate Juneteenth with us. Now, I want to say this, and I said it last year. I am an American citizen. Okay, I was born in the United States, and Juneteenth is a part of my heritage, okay? And just like I hold Juneteenth sacred, the 4th of July is equally as sacred, okay? It doesn't have to be one or the other, okay? I'm American first. And a lot of people say African American. Well, if I go to Africa, I don't think I'm going to see many Adamses there. I might be welcome, I might not, but guess what? I live in this country too. I'm helping to make this country fantastic too. God, I almost said I help make this country great. That will not happen. But what I'm saying is it's an excellent opportunity to come out and enjoy some good food, music. There are a lot of young people that'll be out there performing. If you don't have anything planned, come out and support. With that, I want to thank you guys for tuning in. I want to thank Vince for calling in. I said it before, it's all about dialogue. As long as we have that, we're doing well. Lastly, you guys get on my Facebook page and let me know which name I should choose now that I'm going to become a grandpa. Just for the record, I'm leaning towards Big Homie. Anyway, this has been Jon Adams for Talk of the Town. I want to thank you guys for tuning in, and as always, stay black.